The title of our story today is 3 in the morning. My husband dragged me out of bed. He beat me brutally until my lip was split. Wake up, you useless woman. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law stood by and laughed. I made it to the police precinct before I passed out. And this is what I did to get my revenge. This story about Elena is living proof that karma is real. A woman's patience has a limit. When that limit is crossed, the payback that follows will be far more devastating than anything they could ever imagine. Before we jump into the first chapter, which will make your heart race right away, I ask for your support. Please hit the like button on this video so more people can become aware of stories like this. For those who have not yet done so, subscribe to the Momo's True Stories channel right now and turn on the notification bell. Finally, I want to know who is ready to accompany Elena on her journey. Drop a comment below with your city and type present. Enjoy the story and let us begin. The freezing air at 3:00 a.m. had never felt so bitter. The quiet atmosphere in the luxurious master bedroom, which should have been the safest place for Elena, was suddenly ripped apart by the sound of a slamming door and a roar of rage. Elena woke up startled, her heart racing as if it wanted to burst out of her ribcage. She knew that sound all too well. It was the sound of Brad, her husband, returning from a drinking binge with the sharp stench of alcohol on his breath and a temper that was easily ignited. Before Elena could react, before she even had a chance to sit up and move away, a vicious and brutal grab landed on her wrist. Her light frame was jerked off the plush California King mattress, slamming onto the cold hardwood floor with a sickening thud. Pain shot from her back all the way to her head, but fear was far more dominant. Brad towered over her, his shadow massive and threatening beneath the dim glow of the nightstand lamp. His eyes were bloodshot and blazing. "Wake up, you useless woman," Brad screamed in a hoarse, sickening voice. Those were the words that had always been his favorite mantra to degrade Elena. Elena tried to scramble backward, tears already streaming down her cheeks. It was not just from the physical pain, but from a deep-seated hopelessness that had seeped into her bones. This was not the first time, but every single time it happened, the terror felt brand new and much worse. This time, Brad gave her no chance to escape. He kicked Elena's leg hard, sending her sprawling back onto the floor. Standing in the doorway was another figure. It was Barbara, Elena's mother-in-law, who should have been her protector. Instead, she acted as an avid spectator, enjoying every second of Elena's suffering as if it were the funniest comedy show on television. Her face showed no horror or remorse. Instead, she wore a disgusting, cynical sneer. A dry, low chuckle even rumbled from her throat, a laugh that pierced Elena's heart more sharply than any physical blow. "That is what you get, Elena. It is about time my son taught you a lesson," Barbara hissed, her voice cutting through the commotion. Brad, fueled even more by his mother's support, unleashed a vicious slap. The blow landed squarely on Elena's face, whipping her head to the side as the bitter, metallic taste of blood instantly filled her mouth. Elena's lips split open, and fresh blood dripped onto the floor, staining the white rug a dark crimson. Elena felt an overwhelming dizziness. Her vision began to blur, but her survival instinct screamed at her to fight back. She remembered everything she had sacrificed. She remembered how she had built her small boutique catering business into a successful, high-end restaurant chain, just to be able to purchase and pay off this sprawling suburban Atlanta mansion, which ironically had now become her torture chamber. Brad and Barbara never knew the truth because she had always kept it hidden. They truly believed Elena was just an average housewife, while the luxury they enjoyed came from Brad's corporate job, which was actually nothing more than a mid-level illusion. The thought of her unappreciated sacrifice gave her one last burst of strength. With every ounce of energy she had left, Elena shoved Brad's leg off her body and crawled toward the nightstand drawer by the bed. She managed to grab her smartphone. Brad noticed the movement and grabbed Elena roughly by the hair, dragging her back to the center of the room. "You want to call the cops? Go ahead. Nobody is going to believe a woman like you. Who do you think you are, Elena?" Brad mocked, though there was a slight trace of panic in his voice. While struggling and enduring the stabbing pain in her scalp, Elena managed to send a single emergency SOS text to Robert, her trusted attorney, with just a few blind taps on her phone screen. Then, she shoved the phone deep into the pocket of her torn pajama pants. Barbara, seeing that the situation was starting to spin out of control, stepped closer. "Brad, that is enough. Do not end up killing her, or we are the ones who will have to deal with the legal mess," she cried out, not out of concern for Elena, but out of fear of potential felony charges. Barbara's push on Brad's shoulder turned out to be the opening Elena needed. In their momentary panic, Elena used that split second to scramble to her feet. Despite her unsteady steps and a head that felt like it was spinning, she ran. She did not head for the front door, but instead bolted toward the side French doors that led out to the back gardens. Brad and Barbara realized her escape a second too late. "Catch her! Do not let her get out!" Barbara screamed. Elena ran as fast as she could, ignoring her injuries and the dripping blood. She slipped through the rear security gate that the landscapers always forgot to lock, heading straight for the dark, empty suburban boulevard. She stumbled along, her face bruised and battered, her pajamas torn, with dried blood crusting her lips and the corners of her eyes. She looked like a lost ghost in the middle of the night. Elena had only one destination in mind: the local county police precinct, located about 2 miles from the neighborhood. Every step was sheer torture, but she kept moving, propelled by a mixture of rage and a burning desire to end this torment once and for all. After walking for nearly half an hour, punctuated by several painful falls on the pavement, Elena finally saw the illuminated blue sign of the police station. The neon glow felt like a beacon of safety in an ocean of darkness. She dragged her battered body into the precinct lobby, stepping through the double doors with the very last of her strength. A desk sergeant on duty was immediately horrified at the sight of Elena. She stood in the doorway with a swollen lip, visible bleeding, blackened eyes, and a body that was trembling violently. Her appearance was absolutely heartbreaking. Ma'am, what happened? Do you need medical attention?" the officer asked with deep concern in his voice. Elena tried to speak, tried to explain the brutality she had just survived, but the words refused to come out. She could only point a trembling finger at her split lip and the dark bruises forming on her arms. The severe dizziness she had felt since leaving the house now reached its peak. Her ears rang loudly, and the room began to spin. She only managed to whisper 2 words: "My husband." Before her legs could support her any longer, Elena collapsed onto the linoleum floor of the police station lobby. Consciousness abandoned her completely. She had blacked out. The officers on duty immediately scrambled in panic. They called for an emergency medical team and notified their shift supervisor. While unconscious, Elena was rushed by ambulance to the nearest trauma hospital. However, inside the pocket of her torn pajamas, her phone vibrated. The emergency message she had sent had been received by Robert, the attorney who held all the secrets to Elena's wealth and future plans, the lawyer who was now her single key to total retribution. Meanwhile, back at the luxury mansion, Brad and Barbara felt a wave of relief after hearing nothing from Elena for a while. They wiped up the small bloodstains on the bedroom floor, trying to brush the incident aside. They were convinced Elena was only making empty threats. They were certain she would never dare to do anything against them. They had no idea that the drama they assumed was over was actually the opening act of a total destruction that was about to rain down on their lives. The hospital recovery room smelled of sharp antiseptics and quiet, a stark contrast to the violent chaos of the early morning hours. Elena lay weak on the bed. Her beautiful face was now patched with gauze on her temple and a small butterfly bandage on the corner of her split lip. Her consciousness had only just returned, and the physical throbbing was immediately followed by a deep, aching emotional pain. Sitting quietly beside her hospital bed was a calm, authoritative, middle-aged man. It was Robert, Elena's powerhouse attorney, who had received her emergency alert in the dead of night. Robert spoke in a gentle yet firm tone, explaining how he had immediately handled the hospital administration and ensured Elena received the best possible medical care the moment he was contacted by the police department. He had also already secured the forensic medical report and photographs as undeniable legal evidence. Robert's presence was a guarantee that Elena was not alone, proving that the power standing behind her was infinitely greater than anything Brad and Barbara could ever comprehend. "Rest easy, Miss Elena. I have already taken all necessary precautions. Everything has been documented, and the physical evidence is securely in our hands," Robert said, his voice reassuring and steady. However, that peace did not last long. The door to the recovery room was suddenly pushed open with heavy force. Brad and Barbara marched in wearing fake, panicked expressions, desperately attempting to play the roles of a worried husband and an anxious mother-in-law. They had not come to apologize. They had come for damage control, and most importantly, to intimidate Elena into dropping the police report. "Elena, honey, what happened to you? Why are you here?" Brad cried out, trying to grab Elena's hand with a facial expression that looked remarkably convincing, as if he were the victim of some terrible misunderstanding. Barbara quickly followed behind him, her eyes sweeping the room, looking for an angle to take control of the situation. You really are such a nuisance. Why did you have to run away and create such a huge scene like this? I just want you to drop that police report right now. This is a private family matter, Elena. Elena, despite her profound weakness, gathered her inner strength. She looked at Brad and Barbara with a hollow, freezing stare, stripped of a single tear or any lingering fear. The strength she had forged from her pain had now transformed into an icy bravery. Before she could even utter a single word, Robert stood up tall between Elena and the manipulative mother and son duo. Please step back immediately. Mr. Brad and Mrs. Barbara, Robert said, his voice low and laced with a severe warning. You are strictly forbidden from approaching Miss Elena. We have already secured the domestic violence report and the forensic medical evaluations. Any further communication or interaction with my client must go directly through me. Barbara's face instantly flushed a deep, angry crimson. She had never expected to be confronted by a high-powered attorney. She had always assumed Elena was a naive, simple woman with no resources or connections. And who do you think you are? What kind of ambulance-chasing lawyer dares to interfere in our private family affairs? She snapped dismissively, displaying the usual arrogance she always used to crush Elena. Robert only offered a thin, calculated smile, one that concealed a dangerous edge. My name is Robert Harrison, and I am far from an ambulance chaser. I am the legal counsel who holds full power of attorney over all the assets you are currently enjoying without even realizing it, Mrs. Barbara. And most importantly, I am the man who will ensure your son receives the maximum legal punishment he deserves. Hearing the word assets made Brad and Barbara flinch slightly, but they quickly masked it with scornful laughter. That is complete nonsense. Elena does not own anything. All of this, the house, the cars, the bank accounts, it is all from the money I earn from my hard work. Mom, do not listen to this hack. Elena, drop that report right now, or you are going to regret it, Brad threatened, trying once again to reassert his dominance. Right as the tension reached a boiling point, the door opened again, and another figure stepped into the room. It was Marcus, Elena's closest friend and most trusted business partner. Unlike the formal and composed Robert, Marcus walked in radiating fierce loyalty and burning rage, carrying a massive bouquet of flowers and a bag of clean clothes for Elena. Marcus walked straight over to Elena, completely ignoring the existence of Brad and Barbara. Elena, are you okay? I already set up a secure private residence for you. Do not worry about a single thing. When Brad tried to step around Robert to grab Elena by the shoulder and drag her out of the bed, Marcus spun around instantly. His expression was pure, unadulterated fury. He pointed a sharp finger directly into Brad's chest, his glare piercing and lethal. Do not even think about touching her, or you will regret the day you were born. Touch one single hair on her head again, and I swear to you, it will not just be your freedom you lose. Everything you think belongs to you is going to vanish in the blink of an eye. You have no idea who you laid your hands on last night, Brad, but you are going to find out real soon. Marcus's threat, delivered with the raw emotional power of a protective brother and friend, landed with far more force than Robert's legal warnings. Brad and Barbara froze in their tracks. They felt genuinely intimidated. They had never seen modern Slanas surround naive people who were so bold, powerful, and fiercely protective. More importantly, they had no idea Elena had a close friend who looked as wealthy. Robert took full advantage of this. He handed a formal legal cease and desist order to Brad. This is an official legal warning. You are barred from making any direct or indirect contact with Miss Elena. Any violation of this directive will result in immediate felony charges, including a motion for your immediate arrest and pretrial detention. Now, please leave this hospital room at once. We are moving Miss Elena to a secure location. Even though their hearts were swirling with doubt and fury, Brad and Barbara had no choice. The power dynamic in the room had turned completely against them. They were forced to retreat, leaving Elena with glared looks of pure hatred. As Barbara pulled the door shut, she hissed a parting shot. This is not over, Elena. Do not ever think you can beat us. Once they were gone, Elena let out a long breath of relief. Even though her physical body was still trembling, Marcus held her hand firmly. Robert has already set everything in motion, Elena. We are moving you to a secure high-rise downtown. Your restaurant empire, your corporate holdings, everything has been restructured so they cannot trace a single cent. Right now, we focus on your healing and your master plan for payback, Marcus said softly. Robert then pulled a thick manila envelope from his briefcase. I have the critical documents right here. Aside from the forensic medical reports and the internal CCTV footage you managed to transfer to cloud storage last night, we also have the property deeds. That luxury suburban estate they proudly call their family heirloom, along with the sports car Brad drives every day, are all legally registered under the corporate holding entity we set up years ago. They belong entirely to you. They have simply been acting as authorized users with zero legal ownership. This is our primary weapon. Elena listened intently. The throbbing pain in her split lip was replaced by the roaring fire of vengeance. The early morning cruelty had awakened her, transforming her from a passive victim into a strategic general ready to lead a war of retribution. She had to make them pay for every single blow, every verbal insult, and every mocking laugh Barbara had ever uttered. "I want them to lose absolutely everything, Robert," Elena said, her voice raspy but rock solid. "I want them to know what it feels like to be completely useless and discarded, exactly like they treated me." Robert and Marcus exchanged a knowing look and nodded in agreement. They knew from years of working alongside Elena that once she made a definitive decision, nothing on earth could stop her. The real war had just begun, and this time, Elena was no longer the weak woman being beaten at 3 in the morning. She was a powerhouse, preparing to strike back with intellect, legal authority, and the massive financial empire she had kept perfectly hidden all along. They began arranging Elena's transfer that very night, taking all the essential legal documents and the laptop containing her corporate financial network. The operation to pull the rug out from under Brad and Barbara had officially commenced. Marcus's warning, "Do not touch her or you will regret it," was not just an idle threat. It was a promise of absolute destruction for the arrogant mother and son. A luxury penthouse in one of the city's most exclusive downtown districts became Elena's new fortress. The place was quiet, highly secure, and far beyond the reach of Brad and Barbara. In the living room, styled in elegant monochromatic tones, Elena held a high-stakes strategy meeting with her two primary architects of ruin, Robert, the brilliant legal mind, and Marcus, her loyal best friend and chief operating officer. That evening, Elena was no longer a fragile victim. She was a cold, calculated tactician, ready to oversee her counteroffensive. The meeting began with a comprehensive asset audit. For years, Elena had secretly built a massive catering network and upscale farm-to-table restaurant empire under a corporate holding structure called the Elena Crown Group. Now, she was ready to lay all her cards on the table. Brad and Barbara had always believed their lavish suburban lifestyle was funded by Brad's corporate career, which was actually nothing more than a mid-level management role with a basic salary. They had been living inside a grand illusion of wealth financed entirely by Elena's hard work. Robert laid out the legal strategy with absolute precision. Step 1 is to ensure that all real property and liquid assets they currently utilize are completely ring-fenced from any potential marital distribution claims. Even though everything is legally under your corporate umbrella, Brad might attempt to petition the family court for equitable distribution of marital property. Elena nodded firmly. "I do not want them walking away with a single cent, Robert. That house, those luxury cars, even the checking accounts they love to brag about at the country club, were all funded by the revenue generated by the Elena Crown Group." Marcus added operational details to the plan. "All profits from the restaurant locations and corporate catering contracts have already been funneled into segregated corporate accounts that have zero tie-in to your domestic joint checking. During the week prior to the incident, I already transferred the controlling shares into a newly formed parent trust. Financially speaking, we have already left them standing on ice that is about to crack open." Their strategy was divided into 3 distinct phases: asset stabilization, legal reclamation, and total reputational destruction. Phase 1: asset stabilization and account freezes. The primary target was the sprawling suburban estate that had always been the centerpiece of Barbara's social pride. Robert explained that the estate was never recorded in Brad's name. The deed was held by the corporate entity, with Elena listed as the sole managing member. "Starting tomorrow morning, we initiate an unannounced internal corporate audit," Robert stated. "All corporate perks enjoyed by Brad, including his company expense cards, auto stipends, and access to the primary household operating accounts that Barbara constantly drains for her shopping sprees, will be frozen immediately. We let them suffocate financially without them even understanding why." "Understood," Elena said, holding a warm cup of tea while her eyes remained icy. "I want Brad and Barbara to feel the sting of inconvenience in their daily routines first. Let them panic when their credit cards get declined at Barbara's favorite designer boutiques, or when the luxury car Brad drives is flagged for repossession." Marcus smirked. "I already set the traps. I will instruct our corporate accounting department to send a formal notice terminating Brad's vehicle lease under the clause of unethical off-duty conduct, a legal code for domestic violence, wrapped in cold, undeniable corporate bureaucracy. Phase 2. Legal asset reclamation. This was the core of Elena's retribution. Once the divorce petition was formally filed in county court, Robert would obtain immediate court orders for asset recovery. We will seize their luxury vehicles first, miss. Elena, that will serve as the first public humiliation for Brad. Imagine the sports car he loves showing off to the neighborhood being hooked up to a tow truck by official repossession agents, Robert said, hiding a sharp smile behind his professional demeanor. Once that is done, we deliver the main event, an emergency order to vacate the real estate property. Elena envisioned the look of absolute shock on Brad's face and imagined Barbara's arrogant sneer morphing into hysterical screams. Make sure my sister-in-law, Chloe, is caught in the middle of it too, Robert. She has been one of the primary instigators of Brad's anger, constantly egging Barbara on while freeloading off my money. Of course, Robert replied. Since Chloe has been residing in the property without a lease agreement or paying rent, she is legally classified as a trespasser, once ownership rights are enforced under your corporate title. We will do it in broad daylight on a weekday morning, right when all their wealthy neighbors are watching and their social pride is at its peak. Phase 3. Reputational and social destruction. This was the most personal phase for Elena. She wanted Brad dismantled professionally and socially, just as he had tried to dismantle her self-worth. The internal CCTV security footage from the master bedroom that you managed to save to the cloud will be our silver bullet, Marcus said. My digital team and I will process the raw video so the audio and visual clarity are undeniable. We won't just dump it online immediately. We will hold it as our ace in the hole during the preliminary hearings. If Brad tries to fight the divorce, or if they attempt to push a false public narrative to smear your name, we drop that footage directly to major news outlets and viral social media networks. Elena shook her head. No, Marcus, do not wait for the court hearings. That video needs to drop the moment the timing is right. After the assets are seized, when they are at their absolute weakest and already humiliated, I want the whole city to see who Brad and Barbara really are behind closed doors. I want him fired, ostracized, and left with nowhere to hide. Robert was slightly surprised by Elena's fierce determination, but he knew this was the exact justice his client deserved. Very well, we will time the release of the footage perfectly. But Elena, we must frame the narrative solidly. We have to present you as a survivor who had no choice but to defend herself, protecting any other woman from becoming Brad's next victim. The strategy session continued late into the night. They mapped out the smallest details, from which sheriff's deputies would serve the eviction notice, to preventing Barbara from looting the designer furnishings, right down to the exact wording of the divorce filing. As dawn broke over the city skyline, Elena felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She had traded her passive suffering for an organized, lethal counterattack. She looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the awakening metropolis. She knew that on the other side of town, Brad and Barbara were waking up to start their day, completely oblivious to the fact that the strings holding their lavish lives together were being snipped one by the very woman they had branded useless. The retribution blueprint was finalized. Every document was signed and sealed. Elena had officially secured her entire empire. Starting today, every second Brad and Barbara lived in luxury was borrowed time, and the interest rate on that debt was going to be catastrophic. They were not just going to lose their wealth, they were going to lose their standing in society, which would hurt people like them far more than being broke. That morning, inside the suburban estate that actually belonged to Elena, everything seemed completely normal to Brad and Barbara. They sat at the custom kitchen island, sipping premium espresso and eating a gourmet breakfast prepared by the private housekeeper. They were confident Elena's drama was over. They assumed she was hiding out at some poor friend's apartment or at her parents' modest home, and that she would come crawling back begging for forgiveness any day now. Just watch, Mom. Pretty soon she will be crying at the front door. She cannot survive without our lifestyle, Brad boasted while spreading artisanal jam on his toast, his voice dripping with arrogance. Barbara let out a dry, mocking laugh. Of course she can't. A useless woman like her? Who else would ever want her? Let her feel how cold the real world is out there. Maybe it will teach her to think twice before pulling a stunt like that again. Besides, that arrogant lawyer of hers is probably just some public defender. There is nothing for us to worry about. However, their peaceful morning was shattered in an instant. Brad's smartphone buzzed on the marble countertop, displaying an unknown caller ID from a local government office. Annoyed, he answered the call. The voice on the other end was an official detective from the county sheriff's department, ordering Brad to appear at the precinct immediately to provide an official statement regarding a felony domestic violence investigation. Brad's face drained of color instantly. He dropped his silver butter knife onto his plate with a loud clatter. The cops? A domestic violence felony charge? But I thought she was just bluffing. Barbara, overhearing him, went into an immediate panic. What? The police? Tell them right now it is a misunderstanding. Tell them Elena started the fight. Brad, you get down there right now and shut this down before the neighbors hear about it. Barbara's anxiety skyrocketed. Her biggest fear was the ruin of their family reputation. To her, losing money could be managed, but losing their social status among the neighborhood elite was an absolute disaster. Brad scrambled to call Elena's cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. Her number had been disconnected. He tried calling Robert's law firm, but his calls were routed to an automated answering service. Cold dread began to creep in, replacing their morning arrogance. While Brad was arguing with Barbara about what lie to tell the detectives, the front doorbell rang. A professional courier stood on the porch holding a thick legal envelope embossed with the logo of one of Atlanta's most prestigious litigation firms. The courier demanded separate legal signatures from both Brad and Barbara before handing over the documents. The envelope contained 2 items that instantly obliterated whatever peace of mind they had left. First, an official legal notice from Robert Harrison's firm stating that Elena had formally filed for contested divorce and emergency spousal support, attaching high-resolution forensic medical photos of her injuries as Exhibit A. The petition demanded full termination of marital rights and a massive financial settlement for tortious assault. Second, and far more terrifying, was a formal notice of immediate benefit suspension. Written in icy, uncompromising legal language, the document explained that all financial perks currently utilized by Brad, including corporate credit cards, expense accounts, and access to the primary operating trust, were frozen effective within 24 hours. The cited reason was an unannounced internal corporate investigation into financial misappropriation and off-duty felony conduct. Barbara read over Brad's shoulder, her eyes bulging. Frozen? What is this supposed to mean? My shopping cards? My household funds? Brad? This has to be that hack lawyer's doing. Do not let him intimidate you. He doesn't have any real authority, she screamed, tearing her copy of the letter into pieces with shaking hands. But Brad was not as delusional as his mother. He recognized the letterhead of Robert's firm immediately. That law firm was known as one of the most ruthless and expensive legal teams in the state. Their involvement proved Elena was not playing around, and more terrifyingly, it meant she had enough money to retain them. The burning question was, where did she get that kind of money? Brad immediately tried to use his corporate platinum card to prove the letter was just a bluff. He attempted to book a premium black car service to take him to the police precinct, but the app flashed a red notification. Payment declined. Account suspended. He rushed to the nearest ATM on the corner to withdraw cash, only to be met with the same message. Transaction denied. Please contact your financial institution. Brad's head began to spin. The letter stated 24 hours, but the freeze had already been executed. A literal chill ran down his spine. He looked at Barbara, whose face was now mirroring his terror. Mom, the cards are dead. Our accounts are locked. We cannot withdraw a single dollar, Brad stammered, his voice cracking. Barbara frantically pulled out her personal debit card, which she used to hoard what she considered her leftover monthly household allowance. She opened her banking app on her phone. The screen loaded with the exact same notification, account frozen pending legal review. It wasn't just Brad's primary accounts that were affected. Barbara had been using an authorized secondary card tied to Brad's corporate trust, which was actually funded by Elena's business revenue. Freezing the master account automatically killed every secondary card in their wallets. The chaos in the house escalated when Chloe, Brad's entitled younger sister who lived in the guest wing, stomped into the kitchen looking furious. Mom, Brad, why is my cell phone service disconnected? And my rideshare app just declined my linked card when I tried to order my morning latte, she complained loudly. Fix this right now. The financial paralysis they had never once had to worry about was suddenly a massive, suffocating reality. They couldn't order an Uber, they couldn't buy gas, and they couldn't even pay the utility bill that was scheduled to auto-draft that afternoon. Brad, you get to that police station right this second. Find Elena and force her to drop these lawsuits. Do not let this get out to Chloe's friends or the country club, Barbara demanded, now trembling with genuine fear. After scrounging through drawers, Brad finally borrowed a handful of cash from the housekeeper, promising to pay her back tenfold by evening. He drove his luxury sports car to the precinct, feeling like a pathetic fraud, completely unaware that the car itself would soon be ripped away from him. At the police precinct, Brad tried to convince the investigating detectives that the incident was merely a minor marital disagreement that got out of hand. But he was immediately confronted with the hospital's forensic trauma report, the arresting officer's statement, and the testimony of the desk sergeant who caught Elena when she fainted. The lead detective informed Brad coldly that the felony charges were moving forward to the district attorney's office, and that he needed to prepare for an imminent indictment. When Brad finally returned home late that afternoon, exhausted, empty-handed, and staring down the barrel of a criminal trial, he was greeted by a hysterical Barbara and Chloe. They had spent the entire day without internet access, without working credit cards, and without any hope. None of them realized that every single luxury they enjoyed, every comfort they believed was their birthright, had been paid for by the woman they called useless. And now, that same woman, through the surgical strikes of her attorney, had pulled the financial rug out from under them, leaving them shivering in a storm of legal and financial ruin. They went to sleep that night consumed by anxiety, completely unaware that the next day would bring something far worse. 2 days after receiving the legal warnings and experiencing the total account freezes, Brad and Barbara were living in a state of constant, suffocating tension. With no access to cash or functioning credit cards, they were forced to survive on whatever loose change and bills they had left in the house, even resorting to borrowing more from Chloe and the housekeeper. The financial panic turned the mood inside the grand mansion toxic and volatile. "This is entirely your fault, Brad. Why haven't you tracked down that useless woman and forced her to drop these ridiculous lawsuits?" Barbara screamed across the dining room table, her voice shrill from the frustration of missing her weekly country club brunch. "I have looked everywhere, Mom. Her phone is disconnected, and that lawyer of hers is like a brick wall. Nobody can get through to him. He must have her stashed in some secure building downtown," Brad shouted back, equally frustrated after having to take a budget bus line because he couldn't afford to put premium gas in his car. In the middle of their screaming match, Brad's phone rang. It wasn't human resources. It was the corporate security division at his office. The voice on the other end was stiff and uncompromising. "Mr. Brad, you need to report to the corporate parking garage immediately. We have received an emergency repossession order regarding the company vehicle assigned to you. You are instructed to hand over the keys and all registration documents within the hour." Brad was stunned. The luxury sports car he loved to show off, which he had always claimed was an executive perk of his management role, was being recalled without warning. That car was the ultimate symbol of his status among his peers. He tried to fight back. "What do you mean, repossession? I am off duty today. That car is part of my executive compensation package. You can't just take it," Brad yelled into the receiver. The security officer remained completely monotone. "This directive comes directly from senior executive management, sir. If you are not here within 60 minutes, we are authorized to dispatch a commercial repossession team to your residential address with a tow truck. We strongly advise you to handle this at the office to avoid a public disturbance in your neighborhood." The threat of a neighborhood spectacle instantly deflated Brad's anger. He knew his reputation was already hanging by a thread following his visit to the police precinct. The last thing he could survive was his wealthy neighbors watching his car get repossessed from his driveway. He rushed toward the front door, leaving a confused Barbara behind. "Brad, where are you going? Do not leave me here. What is wrong with your car?" Barbara screamed. But Brad was already out the door, calling for a cheap rideshare that he paid for with his very last $20 bill. At the office garage, Brad was met not by security guards, but by a licensed notary public and a legal representative from Robert Harrison's firm, who happened to lease executive suites in the same building. They offered no room for negotiation. They simply slid a vehicle surrender document across the hood of the car for Brad to sign. The document stated clearly that the vehicle was owned by a commercial leasing entity under contract with the Elena Crown Group, not Brad's corporate employer. Brad realized with a sickening, sinking feeling that he had only ever been a permitted driver. He had zero legal claim to the vehicle. Consumed by rage and burning humiliation, he was forced to hand over the key fob. His primary symbol of wealth and status was gone in an instant. Meanwhile, back in the suburbs, Barbara was reaching her breaking point. Needing a desperate distraction, she decided to take an Uber to her favorite upscale designer boutique, recklessly planning to use a secondary department store charge card she assumed might still work for a smaller purchase. She felt she desperately needed a new luxury handbag to soothe her nerves. She picked out an expensive, imported leather tote and marched up to the cashier with her usual haughty, superior attitude. She handed over her card with practiced confidence. The result was the exact same. "I am so sorry, ma'am, but this card is coming up as declined," the cashier said politely. Barbara exploded. "What is that supposed to mean? How could my card possibly be declined? Run it again. Your system must be malfunctioning." The cashier swiped the card a second time, and then a third. Declined. Several wealthy shoppers in the boutique turned to stare at the commotion. Barbara, who lived to project an image of suburban perfection, felt utterly humiliated in a public setting. She didn't even have enough physical cash in her purse to cover the tax on the bag. She turned and stormed out of the boutique, her face bright red with shame. She was forced to walk several blocks down the busy commercial boulevard in the summer heat, something she had not done in decades. As she waited at a crosswalk, she noticed something across the street. A brand-new, ultra-exclusive culinary destination was buzzing with affluent patrons, its exterior designed with breathtaking modern architecture. The elegant sign above the entrance read, "Elena's Crown." The name triggered a faint memory. She remembered Elena mentioning a small boutique catering project years ago, but Barbara had always mocked it as a silly little hobby. There was no way a silly hobby could have transformed into an upscale restaurant powerhouse like this. Barbara shook her head, dismissing it as a weird coincidence, and caught a bus back to the neighborhood. When she finally walked through the front door of the mansion, Brad was already sitting on the living room sofa. His face was dark and defeated. "They took the car, Mom. It's gone." "I don't have a car anymore," Brad said, his voice barely above a whisper. "And I couldn't even buy a purse. My card was rejected right in front of everyone at the shopping center. What on earth is happening to our lives, Brad?" Barbara wailed. Suddenly, Chloe walked into the room holding a formal piece of mail addressed to Brad. It wasn't a court document. It was a certified notice from the neighborhood's homeowners association and property management board. The letter was a formal demand stating that the monthly HOA dues, security fees, and groundskeeping assessments on the estate had been delinquent for 6 consecutive months. The outstanding balance was tens of thousands of dollars. If the amount was not settled immediately, gate access, neighborhood security monitoring, and utility water services would be terminated. "What is the meaning of this, Brad? We have lived here for years, and you never paid the HOA fees? I thought you handled all the household bills," Barbara demanded, pointing a trembling finger at the notice. Brad defended himself frantically. "I always paid them. That's a routine automated bill. How could it possibly be delinquent? This has to be Elena playing games with the accounts." In that terrifying moment, the reality finally dawned on them. The asset reclamation wasn't just about credit cards or luxury cars. It was about the very foundation of their daily existence. They began tearing through filing cabinets, digging up old financial records to understand why they had never seen an HOA bill or a mortgage statement in their mail. What they discovered was a void of utter confusion. Every single major bill, mortgage payment, property tax assessment, and utility draft had been paid automatically via direct wire from Elena's corporate accounts, the very accounts that were now frozen solid. They had never actually paid for their own lives. That night, they sat together on the Italian leather sofas in their grand living room, but their hearts were heavy with dread. They weren't just broke, they were completely helpless. They were exotic birds living inside a gilded cage, and the actual owner of the cage had just stopped feeding them, leaving them to starve inside their beautiful prison. And they had no idea that the most brutal reality about the ground they stood on was coming with the morning sun. The morning air was crisp, but inside the suburban mansion, the atmosphere was suffocating. Brad and Barbara had barely slept, haunted by mounting financial terror and the looming threat of criminal court dates. For breakfast, they were reduced to eating plain toast and instant tap water tea, a bitter contrast to the gourmet spreads they were accustomed to. With their physical cash nearly gone and every financial channel blocked, desperation had set in. "We have to get a personal loan from some of your executive friends. Brad, we cannot live like this for another day," Barbara groaned, her face looking haggard and aged under the kitchen lights. "None of my friends will even return my calls, Mom. Word is already out around the office that I am facing felony domestic violence charges. My professional reputation is completely dead," Brad replied, burying his face in his hands at the kitchen island. Suddenly, the front doorbell rang, not with a standard chime, but accompanied by heavy, authoritative pounding that echoed through the entire foyer. The knocking sounded like official government business. Brad and Barbara exchanged a terrified glance. An icy knot formed in their stomachs. They knew this had everything to do with Elena. Brad hesitated to open the door, but the pounding grew louder and more aggressive. "Open the door immediately! County Sheriff's Department Civil Division and representatives of Harrison Law. If you do not open this door, we have a court order authorizing forcible entry." The shouted command was loud enough to draw the attention of several affluent neighbors who were out for their morning jogs. Feeling cornered, Brad unlocked and pulled open the heavy oak door. Standing on the front porch were 5 uniformed sheriff's deputies, a court-appointed civil bailiff, and Robert Harrison himself, dressed in a sharp 3-piece suit. Parked directly in the driveway behind them were 2 massive commercial moving trucks. The spectacle immediately drew a crowd. Neighbors stopped on the sidewalks, and neighborhood security golf carts pulled up to watch the drama unfold. "Good morning, Mr. Brad and Mrs. Barbara," Robert said, his tone entirely flat and professional. "We are here to execute a temporary emergency property seizure and an immediate writ of possession issued by the county civil court." Barbara instantly lost her temper. "Seizure? What are you talking about? This house belongs to our family. This is our home. You have zero right to be here," she screamed, lunging forward as if to push Robert off the porch. A deputy immediately stepped between them, holding up a certified, judge-signed court order. "Step back and calm down, ma'am. According to official county land registry records and property deed number 482, this real estate parcel is registered exclusively to the Crown Real Estate Holdings LLC. Miss Elena is the sole managing member and registered agent of that corporate entity. You and your son, Mr. Brad, are in violation of occupancy terms following the filing of a contested divorce. You are ordered to vacate the premises immediately." The announcement hit them like a freight train. Brad and Barbara stood frozen in disbelief. The multi-million-dollar suburban estate they had used to build their social identities, the home they had constantly bragged about to their peers, had been purchased, owned, and maintained from day one by the woman they called useless. The Crown Real Estate Holdings? "That is impossible. That is a forged document." "I bought this house," Brad roared in denial. "The documentation is certified by the state, sir," Robert replied calmly. "This home is not your family inheritance. It is a corporate asset owned by an LLC that you have been occupying without a lease or title. Every mortgage payment, property tax assessment, and insurance premium has been paid in full by the operating accounts of the Crown Real Estate Holdings. You have simply been non-paying, unauthorized occupants, Mr. Brad." Robert offered a sharp, unforgiving smile. As the reality of the situation caused complete chaos on the porch, Chloe stumbled out of the hallway in her robe, screaming when she saw law enforcement officers stepping into the foyer. She too froze in absolute horror when she realized the luxurious mansion she had been using as her personal playground actually belonged to the corporate empire of the sister-in-law she constantly insulted. The sheriff's deputies wasted no time. They moved into the residence and began inventorying and tagging every piece of furniture, artwork, and electronics inside the home. Every designer sofa, custom painting, and high-end appliance was listed as corporate property. Brad and Barbara were informed they were only legally permitted to remove their personal clothing and basic everyday items. Barbara suffered a complete psychological breakdown. She wailed hysterically, attempting to physically wrestle a crystal vase away from a deputy who was placing it into a packing box. "Do not touch that. That belongs to me. I bought that with my own money," she screamed. "I am sorry, ma'am, but corporate financial audits show this item was purchased using a card linked directly to the Elena Crown Group's corporate accounts," the deputy replied coldly, easily removing the vase from her grip. The eviction was surgical, public, and utterly humiliating. Dozens of wealthy neighbors gathered at the edge of the manicured lawn, whispering among themselves and holding up their smartphones to record the spectacle. Brad and Barbara, who had spent years demanding the envy and respect of this entire community, were now the neighborhood's ultimate entertainment thrown out of their own home in broad daylight. Within 2 hours, everything of value inside the residence had been seized and loaded into the moving trucks, including the designer jewelry stored in the master bedroom safe, which legal records proved had been purchased using Elena's corporate funds. Brad, Barbara, and Chloe were left standing on the sidewalk outside the front security gates, clutching a few cheap luggage bags filled with their clothes, watching the moving trucks drive away. In a matter of hours, they had been rendered homeless, stripped of their wealth, and utterly disgraced in front of the elite social circle they had tried so hard to impress. Brad tried desperately to call his corporate colleagues for help, but every single call went straight to voicemail. His reputation as a violent domestic abuser had already circulated through the office, and now this public eviction cemented their status as complete frauds. Robert walked down the driveway and stood before them one last time. You have 24 hours to secure temporary lodging. Do not make any attempt to contact Miss Elena or approach any of her commercial or residential properties again. We have private security monitoring every single location. Brad glared at Robert, his bloodshot eyes filled with toxic rage and helpless regret. Who is Elena really? Why is she doing this to us? Miss. Elena is the founder, CEO, and sole owner of the Elena Crown Group and its nationwide chain of upscale restaurants, Robert said with chilling clarity. She is the woman you constantly branded useless. I think it is fairly obvious who the useless ones actually are in this equation. Robert turned and walked back toward his vehicle, leaving Brad, Barbara, and Chloe standing alone on the suburban curb. Behind them, the iron gates of the estate clicked shut and locked. Surrounding them were the cold, judging eyes of their former neighbors. Their fake dynasty had been completely pulverized, and they were forced to swallow the bitter truth. The woman they had beaten and mocked at 3 a.m. was the actual queen of the empire, and she had just banished them to the streets. The weeks following the public eviction were a living nightmare for Brad and Barbara. Stripped of their home and assets, they were forced to rent a cramped, moldy 2-bedroom apartment in a rundown complex on the industrial outskirts of the city. Their daily existence was a world away from the luxury they once knew. Every remaining dollar went toward basic survival groceries. To make matters worse, Brad was officially terminated from his corporate job after the internal investigation into his domestic violence charges and financial discrepancies concluded. They were both unemployed, socially radioactive, and drowning in poverty. The ultimate climax of their legal destruction arrived on the morning of the divorce trial. The county family courthouse felt sterile, intimidating, and cold. Sitting at the petitioner's table was Elena, flanked by Robert Harrison and Marcus. Elena wore a tailored, slate-gray designer suit. The bruises on her face had fully healed, replaced by an aura of absolute authority and calm resilience. At the respondents' table sat Brad and Barbara, who had been allowed in the courtroom as a witness. They looked disheveled, exhausted, and wearing outdated suits. They couldn't afford to hire a private defense attorney, and local legal aid lawyers had offered little help against a powerhouse firm like Harrison Law. The presiding judge called the room to order, and Robert immediately took the floor. "Your Honor," Robert said, his voice ringing clearly through the courtroom. "This petition for dissolution of marriage is filed on the grounds of severe, documented domestic violence, physical assault, and systemic marital abuse. We have submitted full forensic medical evaluations from the emergency room, police precinct records, and sworn witness testimony into evidence." Brad stood up, his hands shaking as he tried to defend himself. "Your Honor, that is a complete exaggeration. It was a verbal argument that got out of hand. Elena provoked me. She is only doing this to steal my assets and destroy my life." Barbara chimed in from the gallery, ignoring courtroom decorum. "It's the truth, Your Honor. That woman is greedy and manipulative. She is trying to ruin my son." The judge slammed his gavel, ordering Barbara to be silent or face contempt of court. Robert then stepped forward to play the winning hand Elena had prepared, the complete, public disclosure of her corporate identity and financial standing. "With the court's permission, Your Honor, I would like to correct the record regarding the assets Mr. Brad claims to own," Robert said. "Proceed, Counselor," the judge replied. Robert projected a series of corporate filings, bank records, and state business registrations onto the courtroom evidence monitors. Mr. Brad has not only committed felony physical assault against his wife, but he has also been living inside a financial illusion constructed entirely by my client, Miss. Elena is the sole founder, managing member, and CEO of the Elena Crown Group, a hospitality holding entity that owns 15 high-end dining establishments and 3 commercial real estate firms across the region. The total audited valuation of her holdings, Your Honor, exceeds $80 million. A collective gasp echoed through the courtroom. Brad and Barbara sat frozen, their jaws dropped in sheer disbelief. Their faces turned sheet white. $80 million. They had lived in the same house with her for years and had never known. They had truly believed she was just a passive housewife who occasionally baked for hobby clients. The suburban estate that was recently vacated by court order, Your Honor, was not bought with Mr. Brad's income. It is the corporate property of the Crown Real Estate Holdings. The sports car he drove was leased through her corporate account. Every single luxury they enjoyed was funded entirely by the commercial revenue generated by Miss Elena, the very business ventures Brad and his mother constantly mocked as useless. Brad felt the room spinning. Every time he had screamed "useless woman" in her face, every brutal blow he had landed at 3 in the morning, every mocking laugh Barbara had let out, it all came crashing back down onto his own head. Elena had been their life support system, and they had savagely beaten the person keeping them alive. Barbara tried to shake her head in denial, her voice trembling. "No, that is impossible. That is a lie. My son is a senior corporate manager. He paid for our lives. Mr. Brad's annual salary at his former middle management position, Your Honor, did not even cover 10% of the family's annual operating budget," Robert stated coldly, displaying Brad's tax returns right next to Elena's corporate financial reports for comparison. Everything else was quietly subsidized by Miss Elena. The judge called Elena to the witness stand for her final statement. She walked up gracefully, took the oath, and sat down, turning her gaze directly toward Brad. "I did not file this petition out of greed, Your Honor," Elena said, her voice smooth, measured, and echoing with power. "I already own the wealth. I did this to reclaim my human dignity, and to ensure that individuals like Brad and Barbara learn that physical brutality and arrogance carry a devastating price. I wanted them to realize that the woman they tried to crush beneath their feet is the same woman who built the kingdom they were surviving on." The judge had heard enough. The medical evidence, the police reports, and the financial audits were irrefutable. Brad's petition for alimony and equitable distribution of marital property was thrown out entirely. The court confirmed that all corporate assets were legally protected under separate pre-existing entities owned solely by Elena. The final judgment was swift and absolute. Total dissolution of the marriage, granted 100% in Elena's favor, with a permanent restraining order entered against Brad and Barbara. Brad walked out of that courtroom stripped of his marriage, his home, his vehicles, and every single dollar he thought he owned. Out in the marble hallway of the courthouse, Brad broke away from his mother and stumbled toward Elena. Tears were streaming down his cheeks, not tears of genuine remorse for his violence, but tears of absolute terror at facing a life of total poverty. "Elena, please! I am so sorry! I regret everything!" Brad sobbed, reaching out toward her before Marcus stepped in to block his path. "Please do not take everything away from me. I swear I will change. Give me one more chance." Elena paused and looked back at him over her shoulder, her expression completely void of pity. "Your regret is about 3 months too late, Brad. At exactly 3 o'clock in the morning, while I was lying bleeding on the floor of that police station, I made a promise to myself that you would never touch me or my life again. Everything you stole from my existence, my peace, my dignity, and my self-respect I have reclaimed tenfold." Elena turned and walked toward the exit glass doors, flanked by Robert and Marcus, leaving Brad and Barbara standing completely alone in the echoing courthouse hallway. They had been publicly dismantled. Now, they had to face a harsh reality. No money, no careers, no social standing, and no shelter other than a rundown apartment. They had truly become the useless ones, living out the very curse they had tried to place on her. The crushing defeat in family court was only the foundation of the final nightmare awaiting Brad and Barbara. A few hours after the divorce decree was signed, Marcus and his digital team initiated the final phase of Elena's retribution, the total destruction of their social and public reputation. While Brad and Barbara were sitting in the cramped living room of their moldy rental apartment, staring blankly at the wall and trying to process the fact that they were completely destitute, the internet exploded. A major national true crime blog and several high-profile social media networks under an explosive headline, "Exclusive. Former corporate manager caught on camera brutally beating CEO wife while mother-in-law laughs and cheers." The video was the raw, unedited CCTV footage from the master bedroom of the suburban estate on that horrific night. The timestamp in the corner read exactly 3:00 a.m. The footage clearly showed Brad dragging Elena out of bed by her wrists, striking her viciously across the face, and throwing her to the floor. Most damning of all was the clear audio and visual zoom on Barbara standing in the doorway, crossing her arms, and laughing with a sadistic sneer as Elena bled onto the rug. Marcus's team had optimized the audio so that Brad's screams of useless woman and Barbara's chilling laughter echoed with horrifying clarity. The public reaction was immediate, massive, and merciless. Within 3 hours, Brad's full name, his former workplace, and Barbara's face were trending locally and nationally. Thousands of furious comments flooded social media platforms. Brad was universally branded a monster, a domestic violence abuser, and a pathetic parasite who lived off his wife's fortune while abusing her. Barbara received even worse treatment. She was dubbed the mother-in-law from hell, and her laughing face was turned into a viral symbol of domestic cruelty. Women's advocacy groups and local community leaders demanded that the district attorney prosecute Brad to the absolute fullest extent of the law. Inside the dingy apartment, Brad's old smartphone began vibrating violently. He opened his notifications to find thousands of incoming messages, not words of support, but death threats, public shaming, and notifications that his professional LinkedIn profile had been flooded with warning labels by industry peers. He clicked on the trending video and watched his own violent actions play out before the entire world. A wave of intense nausea hit him, but his humiliation was far greater than his remorse. "Mom, we are completely ruined," Brad whispered, turning the phone screen toward Barbara. When Barbara saw her own face sneering on the digital screen, accompanied by tens of thousands of comments calling her a psychopath, she let out a blood-curdling scream. She grabbed her head, completely unable to handle the public disgrace. "Brad, take it down. Call the internet company and make them delete it right now. How am I ever supposed to show my face at the grocery store again?" she shrieked hysterically. Of course, nothing could be deleted. The video had already been downloaded, mirrored, and shared across thousands of platforms. The real-world consequences of the viral drop were devastating and immediate. First, back in their affluent suburban neighborhood, the country club auxiliary members and neighborhood socialites who used to attend Barbara's garden parties immediately issued public statements distancing themselves from her. They kicked Barbara out of every private community group and barred her from entering the country club grounds. Even Chloe, Brad's entitled younger sister, packed her bags and vanished without leaving a forwarding address, terrified that being associated with her brother and mother would permanently ruin her own social life. Second, Brad's attempts to secure even entry-level employment were completely incinerated. Every time he submitted an application or walked into a staffing agency, the hiring manager simply Googled his name, saw the viral domestic violence footage, and ordered him off the property. He had become entirely unemployable in the corporate world. Third, their complete isolation from society was finalized. When Barbara attempted to visit the home of a former church friend to beg for a small cash loan, the homeowner refused to open the door and called the police to report a trespasser. They were trapped. Their wealth was gone, their home was lost, and now their names and faces were synonymous with abuse and parasitism across the entire country. Across town, inside her secure downtown penthouse, Elena sat on her balcony with Marcus, watching the public fallout on a tablet. She didn't feel joy, but she felt a profound sense of closure. The scales of justice had been balanced. She had avenged her physical and emotional scars without ever having to raise a hand in anger. She had proven that intellectual strategy, patience, and financial power were infinitely more lethal than brute force. "This is the official end of their fake suburban dynasty, Elena," Marcus said, raising his coffee mug in a toast. Elena looked down at a printed photo of her battered face taken in the emergency room months ago. "I just wanted them to experience what it truly feels like to be viewed as completely useless by the rest of the world. Now they know." With their lives shattered beyond repair, Brad and Barbara were pushed to the absolute edge of despair, leaving them with only one final, pathetic option: crawling back to beg for mercy from the woman they had broken. Following their complete financial, legal, and social annihilation, Brad and Barbara reached a dark point where their desperation finally outweighed their pride. They had no income, no remaining family, and nowhere else to turn. Barbara was suffering from severe stress-induced heart palpitations, while Brad had sunk into a paralyzing depression. Their only remaining hope for survival was the very woman they had terrorized, Elena. Desperate to reach her, they used outdated neighborhood connections to track down the general vicinity of the downtown high-rise where Elena was living. They spent days loitering on the sidewalks outside various luxury residential towers, hoping to catch a glimpse of her. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, they spotted Marcus's distinct SUV pulling out of a secured underground parking garage. They knew Elena was inside. Brad tried to run past the lobby security desk, but the building's armed security personnel recognized him instantly from the viral domestic violence news reports and physically ejected him onto the pavement. Refusing to give up, Brad and Barbara resorted to a desperate, dramatic measure. They took a city bus back to their old suburban neighborhood, traveling to the security gates of the estate that used to be their home. They knew that Elena or her contractors would eventually visit the property to prepare it for leasing or sale. They planned to stage a pathetic scene of repentance right at the front gates. For 3 days, Brad and Barbara sat on the curb outside the towering iron gates of the estate. The image was a bitter visual irony. The people who once ruled that estate like arrogant royalty were now sitting on the dirty asphalt like vagrants. Former neighbors driving past in their luxury SUVs slowed down only to snap photos on their phones or sneer in disgust. Not a single one offering a bottle of water or a kind word. When Elena failed to appear, Brad realized they were running out of time. Using his cheap, prepaid smartphone, he recorded a pleading video message. "Elena, please, it's Brad," he said into the camera, his voice breaking, his face gaunt and unshaven. "I know I was wrong. I am so sorry for everything I did to you. I am sorry I struck you. I am sorry I ever called you useless. I have lost absolutely everything. I was thrown out of my home, I am unemployable, and I am facing jail time. Please, Elena, come back to me. I swear on my life I will seek counseling and become the husband you deserve. Please just give me one more chance." He turned the camera toward Barbara, who was sitting on the curb beside him, weeping uncontrollably. Her tears were genuine now, not born of true remorse for her cruelty, but born of the terrifying reality of poverty and starvation. "Elena, my dear child, please." Barbara sobbed into the lens, her hands clasped together in prayer. "I was totally wrong. I was a foolish, arrogant, wicked old woman. I know this estate belongs to you. Please forgive your mother-in-law. Do not let us starve to death out here on the streets. We have nothing left. Please, do not punish us like this. I am begging you, drop the civil claims and just let us have a little bit of money to survive." Brad attached the video file to an email and sent it directly to Robert Harrison's official law firm address, knowing it was the only communication channel that hadn't been blocked. At her new executive corporate headquarters downtown, Elena sat at her polished conference table alongside Marcus and Robert. She opened the email and watched the video on the large wall monitor. She watched Brad's pathetic begging and Barbara's desperate, weeping confession. All of their former arrogance had evaporated into thin air. Marcus sighed slightly. "They look completely broken, Elena. Do you think we should wire them a small subsistence stipend just to get them off the streets?" Elena's expression remained set in stone. She shook her head firmly. "They have to pay the full price for their actions, Marcus. When Brad beat me across the face at 3 in the morning, he didn't just split my lip. He tried to destroy my human spirit. And Barbara standing there laughing while I bled onto the floor, that was an act of pure evil. They don't deserve a reward for that. So, what is your instruction, Miss Elena?" Robert asked quietly. "I do not want them dead, Robert. I want them alive, living every single day in the reality they created for themselves," Elena stated with absolute finality. "They need to understand what it means to be at the very bottom." Elena instructed Robert to send a brief, 2-sentence response to Brad's email. No negotiations, no empathy, and no settlement offers. 5 minutes later, Brad's phone buzzed on the suburban curb. He opened the email from Robert Harrison's office with shaking hands. It contained only 2 lines. "The legal system has made its final ruling, and there is nothing left to negotiate. The punishment for your abuse is the life you now have to live." With those 2 sentences, Elena permanently locked the door to her life. She offered no forgiveness and no financial bailout. She condemned them to live in the exact state of helplessness and despair they had tried to force upon her, leaving them to spend the rest of their days drowning in the bitter waters of regret. Several months passed following the trial and the final rejection of Brad and Barbara's pleas. For Elena, time moved forward with incredible speed, bringing immense healing, expansion, and professional triumph. The physical scar on her lip had faded completely, replaced by the unmistakable confidence of a woman who had reclaimed her destiny and built an empire on her own terms. On a crisp autumn evening, Elena stood on a brightly lit stage inside a grand, newly constructed building in Atlanta's premier upscale dining district. She was hosting the grand opening gala for the newest, largest flagship location of the Elena Crown Group. The room was packed with city officials, prominent business leaders, and culinary critics. She wore a stunning floor-length evening gown, radiating the authority and grace of a celebrated CEO. Standing proudly to her right was Marcus, her loyal partner and friend, who had just delivered a heartfelt introductory speech celebrating Elena's resilience and vision. Sitting at the front table was Robert Harrison, raising his glass in silent respect, proud to have represented a client who had risen so triumphantly from the ashes of domestic abuse. When Elena stepped up to the microphone, the room fell silent. She didn't mention Brad's name or the darkness of her past, but her words carried a deep, universal truth that resonated with everyone present. Over the past year, I have learned a profound lesson about self-worth, Elena said, her voice clear and carrying across the ballroom. I learned that a woman's true crown is not handed to her by a partner, nor is it defined by the size of the house she lives in. A true crown is forged in the fire of resilience. For every attempt to knock me down, I built a new business. For every verbal insult designed to make me feel useless, I created a new opportunity for success. Today, I stand before you not as a victim of circumstance, but as the sole architect and owner of my own crown. The ballroom erupted into a standing ovation. Applause echoed off the crystal chandeliers. Elena had found genuine peace, respect, and independence. She had achieved the ultimate revenge not through physical retaliation, but through a level of living and professional success that completely eclipsed the darkness of her past. Meanwhile, on the far industrial side of the city, the reality for Brad and Barbara was stark and brutal. They were still trapped in the crumbling, roach-infested rental apartment, surviving day-to-day on grueling manual labor. Brad had found employment as a minimum-wage day laborer at a wholesale produce dock, hauling heavy crates in the freezing morning air just to pay for basic groceries. Barbara, once the proud hostess of neighborhood garden parties, was spending her days washing and folding laundry for neighbors in the building for a few dollars in cash. That night, after a dinner of cheap instant noodles, Brad turned on the ancient, static-filled television in their small living room. A local news broadcast was covering the premier social events of the week. The screen transitioned to live footage of the grand opening gala for Elena's new flagship restaurant. The camera zoomed in on Elena's glowing, smiling face as she cut the ceremonial ribbon, surrounded by wealthy investors and cheering patrons. The chyron across the bottom of the screen read, "Atlanta's culinary queen. Elena Crown expands multi-million-dollar hospitality empire." Brad and Barbara sat frozen on their battered sofa, staring at the screen in absolute silence. They watched the woman they had beaten, degraded, and branded useless, standing at the absolute peak of society, being celebrated by the very caliber of people they had spent their entire lives trying to impress. Brad looked over at his mother, his eyes hollow and filled with a crushing, permanent regret. "Look at her, Mom. She really owned all of it. We had the world in the palm of our hands, and we destroyed the only person who ever took care of us." Barbara didn't say a word. She simply buried her face in her rough, calloused hands and wept silently. The memory of her own sadistic laughter echoing in the master bedroom at 3 a.m. now played on an endless, torturous loop in her mind. She realized, far too late, that the woman she had treated like dirt was the sole source of her comfort, security, and happiness. Their regret had nothing to do with moral enlightenment. It was the bitter, agonizing regret of parasites who had killed their host and were now left to freeze in the cold. They were condemned to wake up every single day in squalor, carrying the heavy, permanent knowledge that their own cruelty and arrogance had stripped them of everything they ever valued. Elena had not sent them to prison, but she had locked them inside a far more punishing fortress, the prison of their own consequences. The story closes with Elena standing on the rooftop terrace of her new flagship restaurant, looking out over the glittering city skyline alongside Marcus and Robert. She clinked her champagne glass against theirs, a genuine, radiant smile on her face. She had permanently closed the darkest chapter of her life and stepped boldly into a future filled with light, honor, and absolute freedom. She had etched her name permanently into the crown of success, a crown that no abusive hand would ever be able to strip away again. Cruelty and arrogance will always pave the road to ruin, especially when directed at the person who quietly holds the keys to your survival. A woman's ultimate power lies not in her capacity to suffer, but in her ability to rise, rebuild, and let her undeniable success serve as her final judgment.